All right, welcome back. It is 1:33. Let's go back on the record. I think where we left things off was Dr. Miller had completed the summary of his written testimony. And next on my list of things to do is to turn to Mr. O'Brien. Do you have cross-examination questions for Dr. Miller?
I do, thank you.
All right, please go ahead.
Dr. Miller, good afternoon. My name is Kevin O'Brien and I represent the Kern Water Bank Authority in this proceeding.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. O'Brien.
I'd like to ask Ms. Mullen to pull up your PowerPoint presentation and go to slide 16, please. This is one of the hydrographs we looked at during your direct examination. I first want to ask you a foundational question. Who prepared this hydrograph?
I don't know who prepared it. It was in the document prepared by the Kern Fan Monitoring Committee in their 2017, I believe, an annual report.
And what is the Kern Fan Monitoring Committee, just briefly?
So it's a group of entities, the Water Bank is a member and Buena Vista is a member as well, that I think actively monitor wells in the Kern Fan area.
So they do this type of reporting in the regular course of the business of that committee, is that correct?
Yes, they do.
Okay. And this hydrograph, which you showed us, shows a decline in the groundwater level in this well, at least as to the end point on the hydrograph, which is sometime in 2017. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now I'd like to move Ms. Mullen to the next slide, slide 17. This is another hydrograph that you showed, correct?
Yes.
And this was also prepared by the Kern Fan Monitoring Committee, is that correct?
Yes.
I'd like to now put up on the screen, Ms. Mullen, KWBA Exhibit 418. And I think we can probably skip to the next page, Ms. Mullen. We can come back to the map if we need to. So this is I will represent to you, Dr. Miller, that this is a hydrograph prepared by the Kern Fan Monitoring Committee that shows data for this well, which is the same well that was depicted in your slide 16, but the data extends through 2020. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Would you agree that this hydrograph containing this more recent data is a more appropriate depiction of the situation with groundwater levels in this well for purposes of this hearing?
It's certainly a more current representation.
Okay. And then if we could move to the next page, Ms. Mullen. I'm sorry, the next one after that. There we go. So this again is also a hydrograph prepared by the Kern Fan Monitoring Committee that with respect to the well that was shown in your slide 17 shows groundwater levels through data available, I believe, in 2020. And my question again is whether this wouldn't be a more appropriate depiction of the more recent data relating to groundwater levels in that particular well.
Well, what it looks like to me is that this is the slide you presented just a moment ago that is a more recent version of slide 16
Okay.
in my report. And you might want to, Ms. Mullen might want to step down one more. Is that correct, Mr. O'Brien?
You may quite well be correct in that, Dr. Miller. I'll ask Ms. Mullen, is there another hydrograph?
It would reference 14M. Well,
Yeah.
14M, I think.
14M.
Yeah.
That's 13D.
Mr. O'Brien, if I may, I think you need to go to the next Kern Water Bank Authority exhibit.
So that would be 419.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tokar.
Yes.
So here's the 12B well.
Mhm.
And this, again, we're represented, was prepared by the Kern Fan Monitoring Committee. And this shows data through, it looks like around the start of 2020.
Mhm.
And my question is whether this would be a more recent representation of what's happening with the groundwater levels in that particular well.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. You could take that down, Ms. Mullen. Thank you very much. Dr. Miller, in your direct testimony, you discussed some of the geologic structures in the Button Willow area, and you mentioned the E-clay. You recall that?
I do.
And I believe you said that that E-clay is a consolidated structure that really forms a barrier to flow in the subsurface. Is that right?
That is correct in the location of the Button Willow service area. I think as you move further east, it becomes less well consolidated, and which is a reason why in Button Willow wells tend to extract from above the E-clay, whereas to the east, there are wells both above and below the E-clay.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Ms. Mullen, if we could now go back to Dr. Miller's PowerPoint, slide 6 this time. And we're going to need to blow this up. We may need to go to the actual exhibit, but let's give this a try if we could. Maybe just one more increase, Ms. Mullen. That should do it. And then if you could move it up just a little bit. Perfect, perfect. Okay. So, Dr. Miller, I wanted to ask you about the line, or there's a figure below the figure entitled San Joaquin Valley Syncline. There's a series of numbers in a vertical column, and the last number is a plus 200. Do you see that?
I do see that.
And let me ask you first, what's the source of this particular document?
I think it might be referenced on that location on that page. I would have to look up the reference. I think it might be page, but I'm not sure about that.
Okay. Were you involved in preparing this report, or did you contribute to?
I did contribute to the report that document was presented in, yes.
Okay, and what was your contribution?
It was I was reviewing that and then doing some editing and working with with Todd Engineering, that Todd Grundweiler, that actually prepared that report.
And in your testimony earlier today, you discussed how the southern portion of the Button Willow area has groundwater that tends to move southward. Is that correct?
Well, it tends to move. Yeah, in the southern portion of the Button Willow service area, it tends to move along the axis of that San Joaquin Valley syncline, so southward or southeastward, really.
Okay.
More accurately.
So basically following the red San Joaquin Valley syncline, following that arrow that moves down to the southeast.
Precisely.
And the red markings on this document, were those your markings or were they by somebody else?
They're markings by Todd,
Okay.
by the people that developed this. So, so the original map came, again, I believe, from Page, but the location of these structures was introduced by Todd.
Now, back to this notation, the plus 200 notation.
Uh-huh.
How do you interpret that on this document?
I would have to look at the legend for the document if that's shown there.
Yeah, I think we can, if Ms. Mullen, if we could dial that out a bit so Dr. Miller can see the legend.
Yeah, I don't see it here. I can, okay, contour elevations. Yeah, contour elevation to base of E-clay in feet.
So that would be, the plus 200 would be a contour elevation to the base of the E-clay in feet. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And the plus 200 is in reference to what?
The plus 200, I would presume that the plus 200 is in reference to mean sea level.
So that would be 200 feet above mean sea level.
Looking at this now, that's my interpretation, but I could be mistaken.
Okay. And what is the elevation of the groundwater table in this portion of the basin in the vicinity of the word San Joaquin Valley syncline?
I think if we looked at the groundwater levels in the hydrograph or the hydrographs for wells DMW 08 and DMW 12, we would see a current representation of that. And those hydrographs are part of this presentation, so we can move down a few slides.
Let's do that. And I unfortunately don't have the slide references. Perhaps you do there. Have them handy for Ms. Mullen.
I don't, but if we just step through this, we can reach those shortly.
I believe it's slides 12 and 13.
Thank you, Mr. Becerra.
Yes.
Okay, and go down one more, Ms. Mullen.
So this is the slide, and we're looking at slide 13 now of your PowerPoint.
Yes, that's right. So you can see that the elevations are, between 150 and 200 feet.
And that's again above mean sea level.
Yes.
And let's look at the other well now. This is, let's
So step down, it's one
Yeah,
more.
this is DMW 08 and this one will be DMW 12B, correct?
Yeah. So again, this is, I think between 150 and 100.
Okay. Now let's go back to figure we were looking at before we went to the hydrographs, the one with the plus 200. And if we could, sorry to keep going back and forth, Ms. Moll, but if you could again zoom in a bit on that. Great, thank you. So this plus 200 line, and you can see the line continues, it eventually intersects the red arrow at the San Joaquin Valley syncline and continues to move up the figure. You said that that indicates a geologic structure that exists at 200 feet above mean sea level. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I must be mistaken because that would have that at an elevation above the groundwater levels we were just looking at.
Well, that's my question, sir. As I interpret this, given the information you provided, the groundwater level, your interpretation would have the groundwater moving over a geologic structure, as I understand it, an E-clay structure that is higher than the level of the groundwater. Is that a fair interpretation?
Objection, misstates testimony. The numbers plus 100 and plus 200 on the figure are to the west of the California Aqueduct, and Buena Vista Water Storage District's boundaries don't extend there, as I understand it.
Well, I'm not talking about Buena Vista's boundaries. I'm just talking about this figure, which was used in Dr. Miller's testimony. I just want to understand the movement of groundwater. I'll let you rule on the objection, Ms. Kinsey. Sorry.
Let me sustain the objection, but just to let's get us restarted, Mr. O'Brien, and try the question maybe in a simplified way. It seems like we've come across something, so maybe I will hand it to you to get to the bottom of it.
I'll try to simplify it if I can. So let's start again with what exactly the line denoted plus 200 signifies.
I think based on the discussion we've been having, we are both interpreting that correctly in that it is the base of the E-clay, but as Mr. Becerra pointed out, the particular area where that 200 contour lies is really outside of the Buttonwillow service area. And whereas if you look within the Buttonwillow service area, you have contours that are more like minus 200, minus 300. So you have significantly lower contours.
But with respect to this figure and your testimony relating to this figure about the direction of groundwater flow, am I correct in interpreting this figure as showing an incorrect direction of groundwater flow, since it seems to show groundwater flowing over this base of E-clay as you described it?
Yeah, no, I don't think that's right, because the elevations that we were just looking at in the hydrographs are above mean sea level, and these contours that are within the Buttonwillow service area are elevations that are below mean sea level. They're with the minuses. And we're not, I don't think there's a location where we're showing the groundwater is flowing over the E-clay at an elevation where the E-clay is at an elevation of of plus 200, for example.
So you do not interpret this figure as showing groundwater flowing above the base of the E clay at plus 200 above mean sea level.
That's correct.
I'd like to now turn to your testimony, your written testimony. See if I can find the exhibit reference. It's Buena Vista 400. And if we could go to paragraph 3. On line 20 of that paragraph, you describe what you characterize as, quote, Buena Vista's long-running success in conjunctively managing surface water and groundwater. I'll just stop the quote there.
Yes.
Have you performed any research to determine when this conjunctive management of surface water and groundwater by Buena Vista first began?
I have not. The documents I've prepared for Buena Vista have been agricultural management plans, the groundwater sustainability plan, other documents that have been relatively contemporary. So I have not looked into the history of the district in the way that the historians who have testified have, or others have.
Okay, thank you. So I would assume then that you don't have any information about conjunctive management of surface water and groundwater by Miller and Lux. Is that correct?
I do not.
If we could now go to your testimony, paragraph 28. On this paragraph, you refer to Dr. Littlefield, and you make the statement that Buena Vista and even its predecessor, Miller and Lux, have implemented conjunctive management for many decades. Do you see that?
I do.
Based on the answers you gave me just a minute ago about the extent of your historical research, is it accurate for me to conclude that you really don't have any information about conjunctive management that was implemented by Buena Vista and its predecessor, Miller and Lux?
You know, other than the testimony that I reviewed by just for background information from Dr. Littlefield, no, I don't have any research that I've done myself.
So basically everything you know about that subject comes from Dr. Littlefield, is that correct?
For that period, correct.
Okay. Now the Kern, I'm sorry, strike that. Buena Vista is located within the Kern subbasin, is that correct?
That is correct.
And the Kern subbasin has been categorized by the California Department of Water Resources as critically overdrafted.
Also correct.
You know, the estimated extent of the overdraft currently?
I don't. I have an idea, but I don't want to. I am not confident that in stating it, so I'll say no.
Okay. And that critical overdraft categorization applies to the entire Kern subbasin, correct?
Correct.
Do you consider yourself an expert in groundwater management matters?
Objection, vague and ambiguous as to groundwater management.
Okay, let me rephrase. Dr. Miller, your testimony discusses, at least in part, activities under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, correct?
Correct.
And do you do a lot of work in the field of Sigma implementation and Sigma groundwater sustainability plans?
Also correct.
So do you at least consider yourself an expert in relation to Sigma related groundwater matters?
I'm hesitant to use the word expert, but I would say, I'm a practitioner. I'm knowledgeable.
Okay. My question to you, Dr. Miller, is with respect to the proper management of a groundwater basin, such as the Kern subbasin, do you consider it sound practice to regularly transfer surface water outside the basin for use in other areas?
Objection, vague and ambiguous and incomplete hypothetical.
I think sustained. What is, well, I won't add objections to it, but sustained, Mr. O'Brien.
Apparently everybody agrees that was a bad question. So well, let me put it this way, Dr. Miller. There's been testimony in this hearing that Buena Vista regularly transfers Kern River surface water outside for use outside the Kern subbasin in connection with its transfers to Castaic Lake Water Agency. Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with that.
From your standpoint as someone knowledgeable regarding Sigma, do you think it's appropriate for a district like Buena Vista to be transferring surface water out of a subbasin that's designated critically overdrafted by DWR?
Objection, vague and ambiguous, calls for a legal conclusion. Sigma recognizes management areas. Buena Vista has its own GSP.
Objection, relevance.
I'll overrule the relevance objection because I think this door has been opened. But Mr. O'Brien, I am going to sustain the objection in terms of vague and ambiguous. And I think you have made your point, at least so far, unless there's a continuation of your point.
No, I would like to get an answer from Dr. Miller. So I'm gonna keep trying here.
Okay.
Have you personally ever raised with Buena Vista or anyone associated with Buena Vista the question of whether it's appropriate to be transferring Kern River surface water out of a critically overdrafted subbasin?
No, I've
Objection,
never.
relevance.
Objection, again, vague and ambiguous. Buena Vista received a letter from Department of
Excuse me.
Water Resource.
Excuse me, I'm getting very tired of these speaking objections that are in effect coaching the witness. And I think it's completely inappropriate for Mr. Becerra to insert factual information into an objection.
And I think that, and thank you, Mr. O'Brien. And that's right. Here's what my sticking point with the question, Mr. O'Brien, is this word appropriate. And I don't know if that's what Mr. Becerra is focused on or not. But I think that is a little bit of an unfair, well, it's vague. What is appropriate? And that's an open question. I think there may be a way to ask the same question that's somewhat more factual. And at the risk of coaching the questioner, you maybe could relate it to the Sigma objectives and such things. So Maybe give it another, I'll allow you to give it another shot.
I'll give it one more shot. Dr. Miller, you understand, as someone who works in the realm of Sigma, that Sigma is focused on achieving the goal of sustainability, correct?
Yes,
And the goal of sustainability, or the concept of sustainability, is defined in Sigma by reference to certain undesirable results. Is that correct?
that is correct.
And can you tell me, and I don't expect you to have the whole list memorized, but what are some of the undesirable results that Sigma is designed to prevent?
Let's see. I'm just thinking of the word, but one is this isn't the correct word, but it amounts to prolonged lowering of groundwater levels, reduction in groundwater storage, degradation of groundwater quality, contamination by seawater, which is related, inducing subsidence. So those are the ones that first come to mind.
That's good. You did better than I could have off the top of my head, Dr. Miller. So with those undesirable results in mind, from the standpoint of achieving the goal of sustainability as ultimately required by Sigma, in your opinion, is the export of surface water from a basin that's categorized as critically overdrafted consistent with the achievement of those sustainability elements that you just described?
Objection, vague and ambiguous, and calls for a legal conclusion.
Objection, relevance. We are so far from the issues of phase 1B.
Well, Mr. Jacobs. All right. Thank you. Your relevance objection is noted and it continues to stand as long as we're on this line of questioning, but is overruled. I think the question of I've made my rulings with respect to Buena Vista's evidence with respect to Sigma. So I think Mr. O'Brien does have the chance to investigate some of these issues. With respect to this question and the vagueness of this question, I'm going to overrule the objection. Let's get an answer from Dr. Miller. Dr. Miller, you're welcome to caveat your answer as is appropriate, or respond that you don't know. So let's go forward.
I would say that you have to look at these things kind of in the entirety. So I do not believe blanket prohibition on transfers is necessary to achieve sustainability, or in some cases is even beneficial toward achieving sustainability.
And that includes transfers outside the particular basin that's categorized as critically overdrafted.
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Is there anyone else who has questions for Dr. Miller? All right, then Mr. Becerra, do you have redirect for Dr. Miller?
Very briefly.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Ms. Mullen, can you please pull up exhibit KWBA 418? And could we please scroll to the hydrograph for well 13D? There you go. Dr. Miller, do you recall Mr. O'Brien asking you questions about this slide?
Yes, I do.
Do you see that the data on this slide ends in the year 2020?
Yes, I do.
Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up exhibit BV 809? Thank you, Ms. Mullen. Can we please go to slide 3? Dr. Miller, do you see that this is also a hydrograph for well 13D?
I do.
Do you know whether this graph contains more recent data than the 2020 version that Mr. O'Brien showed you?
Yes, it does.
Does this more recent hydrograph show a decline from the 2020 levels?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up Dr. David's PowerPoint summary, exhibit Buena Vista 402? And go to slide 13, please. Dr. Davids, is it accurate to summarize the slide in this figure as showing a hydrograph for well DMW8?
Yes.
And where is that well located?
It's located about a quarter of the way up from the south of southern limit of the district, not too far from Button.
Do you consider this hydrograph in that well to indicate that groundwater levels are stable in Buena Vista's Button Willow service area?
Well, you do see a decline after that jag about 2007, but considering the hydrologic conditions that we've experienced during the period from 2007 to the present, yes, I do.
And to the extent that the portion of the Kern groundwater basin located to the east of Buena Vista is overdrafted, would you believe that this hydrograph indicates that? I'm sorry, let me rephrase. That was a bad question. I'll just stop. Thank you. Completed redirect.
It's Friday afternoon.
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. With that brief redirect, Mr. O'Brien, do you have any follow-up cross-examination on the redirect?
I do not.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. And I should have mentioned earlier, I don't have any additional questions, and the AHO team does not have any additional questions for Dr. Miller. So thank you, Dr. Miller, so much for joining us on a Friday. I really appreciate your testimony and appreciate having you here with us today. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for being here on a Friday as well. Thank you.
I'm taking a look at our time. I think it would be appropriate to keep things moving along, to move on to if you agree, Mr. Becerra, I know you'll need 5 minutes to switch witnesses, but moving along to Dr. Howe, is it? Do I have that right? You're on mute, but I saw a yes.
Yes, Dr. House.
Dr. House, let me take back what I said. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. Then you can rearrange your witnesses and we can all take a moment, get a drink of water. And then we will meet back at 2:22 and start with Dr. Howe's testimony.
Thank you.
Welcome back. It's 2:20. Let's go back on the record. I see Dr. Howes. I see Mr. Becerra. I see Mr. O'Brien. So Mr. Becerra, are you prepared at this time to call your next witness, who I understand is Dr. Howes?
I am.
Wonderful. Dr. Howes, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on a Friday afternoon. If you would please unmute your microphone and raise your right hand. Dr. Howes, do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. You may proceed, Mr. Becerra.
Ms. Mullen, can we please bring up Exhibit Buena Vista 502? Dr. Howes, can you please state your name for the record?
Daniel J. Howes.
Is Exhibit Buena Vista 500 your written testimony?
Yes, it is.
Do you have any corrections you need to make to that testimony?
Yes, I do.
Should we bring testimony up? Ms. Mullen, can we please bring up Dr. Howes' testimony, Exhibit Buena Vista 500? Dr. Howes, can you provide your corrections to the testimony?
On paragraph 8, line 16,
And can you just wait a moment? We'll allow Ms. Mullen to
sure.
get what she needs.
I would like to correct the 1969 Buena Vista appropriations under their second point right, from 514,632 to 573,777. And if I may, can I explain those changes during my testimony, during my summary of testimony?
Do you have any other
Yes.
corrections
Can we
to
go
500?
Please go to line 27. Due to this change on line 16, on line 27, I would like to strike and 1969, since 1969 is now higher than 2017. And then also similarly on line 28, I would like to strike and 1969 for the same reason.
Dr. Howes, do you have any other corrections to make to Exhibit Buena Vista 500?
No, I don't.
So with those corrections, does Exhibit Buena Vista 500 state your testimony for this hearing?
Yes, it does.
Dr. Howes, is Exhibit Buena Vista 501 a statement of your qualifications?
Yes, it is.
And what is your occupation?
I am a project manager engineer at the Irrigation Training and Research Center and a professor at Cal Poly State University, San Luis Obispo, in the Bioresource and Agricultural Engineering Department.
Is Exhibit Buena Vista 502 a summary of your written testimony?
Yes, it is.
Will you be making corrections to that as you present it?
Yes, I will.
Is Exhibit Buena Vista 503 your technical memorandum?
Yes, it is.
Do you have any corrections to make to the technical memorandum?
Yes.
Ms. Mullen, can we please pull up Exhibit Buena Vista 503? And Dr. Howes, can you please explain your corrections to Buena Vista 503?
Yes, if we can go to page 1, table 1, please. In the second column,
next to 1969, the 514,632 should be changed to 573,777 to include Lake Isabella storage and losses. Also on page 18, this is PDF page 18 and regular page 18. Equation 3, please change the minus sign between Point and Isabella at the end of that equation to a plus sign, as it is discussed correctly in the text below. I had a typo, so I apologize for that. And on page 25, figure 18, in the green box where it says Buena Vista total appropriations under their second point right, please change 632 to 573,777.
Dr. Howes, do you have any further corrections to exhibit Buena Vista 503?
I do not.
With those corrections, are exhibits Buena Vista 503 through 506 the exhibits to your written testimony?
Yes, they are.
Ms. Mullen, can we please pull Buena Vista 502 back up? Dr. Howes, using exhibit Buena Vista 502, can you please provide a summary of your testimony?
Yes, I can. Excuse me. Ms. Mullins, can we please go to the next slide? So the purpose of my testimony and my analysis is to address some of the questions that were identified in the January 12th, 2022 notice of pre-hearing and notice of public hearing on behalf of Buena Vista Water Storage District, a valid water right holder on the Kern River system. Next slide, please. I'm going to start with my conclusions. The maximum appropriations under Buena Vista's second point right are shown in the analysis. This is a location where I will make a correction. Please change the 514,632 to 573,777. Again, I will explain that later in this testimony. The range of maximum appropriations that occurred or ranged from 522,832 in 1952 to 573,632 in 1969. These maximum appropriations occurred during wet years following a dry period of 1 or more years, as we'll look at. The other aspect that I'll discuss in the next slide is the Kern River runoff varies significantly year to year. That's important for Buena Vista Water Storage District to be able to store the high water or the high flows during wet years to utilize during dry periods and drought years. The district is conjunctively managed. They both have surface and groundwater storage, and it's important that they be able to recharge the wet year flows. Next slide, please. So briefly, I will discuss the evaluation process. This is from North Kern 3. I've modified it a little bit, but the original graph is the natural flows at first point from 1894 to 2020. The evaluation examined 13 years from 1938 to 2017, 13 of the wettest years. These years include pre and post intertie, pre and post Isabella, and it allowed me to examine different conditions and understand why there were differences in appropriations. Next slide, please. Here you can see the list of exhibits that I used. These exhibits were provided by Mr. Bell as he testified yesterday. The exhibits were used to analyze the maximum appropriations under the second point right for Buena Vista. The analysis looked at both upstream and downstream of second point. I use the term absorption in this intermediate step, really to stay consistent with the 1964 analysis. Absorption upstream includes storage and losses in Isabella, banking, exchanges, and transfers. Absorption downstream would include direct irrigation deliveries, groundwater recharge, and surface storage. Next slide, please. This is an example of the graphic that I use to depict or to showcase the analysis. It's a water balance analysis. It's important when doing a water balance analysis to properly define your boundaries, both spatially and temporally. Temporally means by time. So with these analysis, we're looking at 1-year periods. So in that case, it's extremely important to understand changes in storage and how they're going to impact that year's analysis and appropriations. The analysis flow here, you can look at the lower table on the right-hand side. You can see that's flow past second point. It shows which group water that belonged to at that point. From there, we can move clockwise. On the lower left, you can see the intertie flow. That's the flow out of the boundary area. So this boundary area I'm calling Buena Vista zone of influence. They control how water moves within that zone and how it's used. And flow out is going to be the intertie flow. And if we move up to the yellow box on the upper right-hand or left-hand side, excuse me, you'll see the flow past Highway 46. That's the same as Wasco Highway. And that's to the lower river group. The blue box in the middle shows the results of that balance, of this surface water balance, where we see that what I call absorption within Buena Vista zone of influence. And then what happened upstream of second point is shown in the other blue box, and that's the absorption upstream. And those two are totaled into the green box, which is the total appropriations under the second point right. Next slide, please. The results of all 13 years is shown in the table. We have the second column showing the total appropriations on the second point right. The third and fourth column show the water year as a natural flow at first point, and then the percent of long-term average over the time frame. Time frame being in that first graphic from 1894 through 2020. You can see in the fifth column, that's the intertie operation, and NI identifies that the intertie was not available. The Y pump is that there was a pump instead of the intertie. A Y is if it was operational, N is if it was not. And then the final columns show the prior year Kern River flows, identifying average to slightly above average in the light blue, well above average in the blue, and then drought years or drier years in the yellow. You can see that the three highest appropriation years, 52, 69, and 2017. I will correct on this slide, next to 1969, the 514,632 should be 573,777. Next slide, please. So we'll start by analyzing 1952. You can see there's kind of a salmon colored box on the right-hand figure. That's going to allow you to see what kind of water year this year was, as well as what kind of water year the previous year was. So you can see in 1951, the Kern River flow was at 62% of normal, or of average. I shouldn't say normal, what's normal. On the left-hand side, you can see the infrastructure. I discussed this in detail in my technical report. how the infrastructure changed with time in Buena Vista from 1939 to present. In 1952, you can see second point there on the left-hand side. The aerial photo, by the way, is more current. It's not from 1952. The Alejandro Canal, its alignment has changed since this time, but was primarily used to supply the Maples Canal. The inlet canal would have been the main inflow source into Buena Vista Lake Reservoir from the terminus of the Kern River. Water could be moved directly into the outlet canal and into Buena Vista's Buttonwillow service area, either through the main canal or the Richfield bypass. In wet years and typically normal years, water went into the inlet canal and into Buena Vista Lake Reservoir. It's important to understand from an operational standpoint that this reservoir is very important. We're at the tail end of a river system that's variable, not only year to year, but day to day. And having this variability from an operational standpoint, you have to have some way to buffer it or to what they call equalize it. So water would move into Buena Vista Lake Reservoir, into the inlet canal, and then be metered out into the outlet canal into Buena Vista service area to supply their farmers. And that Buena Vista Lake Reservoir was a buffer or regulating reservoir to be used, which is very important and not unusual, actually, in irrigation projects throughout the Western U.S. In 1952, you can see that there was no California aqueduct, there was no intertie, so all the water, you can see 707,000 acre feet flowed past second point. Approximately 127,000 acre feet was stored in Buena Vista Lake, and that's the start and end of the season, or January 1st to December 31st would be December 31st being the end, January 1st being the start. Approximately 184,000 moved past Highway 46 to the north through the flood channel, and that is a net value. So that's what's moving past Highway 46 to the lower river group, which will be different than what moves past the concrete weir. Next slide, please. I'd like to make a change on this slide. The 514,632 in the green box on the right should be changed to 573,777. And I'll explain why that correction is being made. In my analysis, but not in my summary data, I included the Lake Isabella change in storage during 1969, and I did not include it in these values here. So my analysis did include it. The text in my technical report also did include it. So my apologies for making that typo, but I'm glad I was able to correct it.
Dr. House, just for the record, you're speaking about your slide for 1969. Is that accurate?
That's right, 1969. So there should have been another blue box next to that that said absorption upstream. A second point, including Lake Isabella losses of 514,496, and an Isabella change in storage of 44,649. A total of 59,145 should be added to the absorption within the BV zone of influence to come up with 573,777. So in 1969, there was over 1 million acre feet. I want to clarify, all of these values are just Kern River flows. So in some of these years, especially 1969, there was significantly more flow coming past second point. That would have been, for example, Frank Kern flow, or still into the Kern River. So again, this is 1,888,000 acre feet of Kern River water past second point in 1969. 90,000 was pumped into the California aqueduct through a pumping system that was installed I don't know if it was temporary, but it was there for quite a while afterwards. It was used as a turnout to move water back from the California Aqueduct into to BV and Henry Miller water district in more recent years. But the pump system was installed there, and 90,000 acre feet was pumped into the California Aqueduct in 1969. Approximately 484,000 acre feet net moved north of Highway 46 to the lower river group. And the total absorption within Buena Vista zone of influence was 514,632. Next slide, please. In 2017, the third highest appropriation year, the infrastructure has changed dramatically in Kern County overall, and also within Buena Vista's infrastructure. A lot of things have happened since 1969, and some of those changes include a rerouting of Alejandro Canal. You can see that there's a light shaded blue on up above or north of Buena Vista Lakes cells 2 and 2R. That is the Buena Vista Aquatic Recreational Area. So Alejandro's routed into the Buena Vista Aquatic Recreational Area. And then water can be moved from there into the Maples Canal or into the outlet canal. Other changes include the Kern River intertie. Along with that, what was called the waste weir was replaced with the outlet weir right next to the Kern River intertie. That moves water from the terminus of the river channel into the outlet canal. And that water can move then into Buena Vista Buttonwillow service area. We can see that 205,000 acre feet, a little over that, moved past Second Point in 2017. You can see the comparison to 1969, which was over 1,205,000. From an operational standpoint, from Buena Vista's point of view, this would have meant a lot easier way to operate. Right? So only having 200,000 move past Second Point is much easier to deal with than over 1 million. That doesn't even include the amount, how the water moved past it from a month-to-month, day-to-day basis. So the no water moved into the intertie. No water went to the lower river group to the north of 46. One of the main reasons that the flow past Second Point was much lower than other years similar was that all of the lower river water and other water was absorbed between First and Second Point. Another reason is that 2017 was after the historic drought between 2012 and 2016. So there was a lot of places to store water, including Lake Isabella. You can see there was a positive change in storage in Isabella over the 2017 water season. Banking and transfers was about 309,000 acre feet. Storage in Isabella, about 38,000 acre feet. And so the total absorption within Buena Vista's service area, or zone of influence, I should say, was 205,000, the same that went past Second Point in 2017. Next slide, please. So 1978 was the year I call the exception that proves the rule. These high appropriation years that I've shown previously occur after a drought or dry period. 1978 follows one of the driest periods, a shorter period than 2012 to 2016, but very dry. You can see in the salmon colored box in the middle, 1977, the average Kern River runoff was 27%. So the anomalies that occurred in 1978, there were two of them that I believe impacted the total appropriations in this year. So first I'll talk about the flows, and then I'll talk about the the anomalies. So if you look in the gray box, you can see flow past second point totaled 456,000 acre feet, approximately 169,000 went into the intertie, and 18,000 passed north of 46 to the lower river group. So total absorption within BB's zone of influence was 269,000 acre feet, thereabouts, approximately. BB Lake change in storage was about 17,000 acre feet in that year. There was significant storage also in Lake Isabella, shown as well as banking and transfer in 1978. But the anomalies that occurred, there was a very significant storm that occurred in February, between February 9th and 10th in Kern County. It was called the Buena Vista Lake Storm. February 9th and 10th storm still holds the highest rainfall amounts in any 24-hour period in Bakersfield and southern and in Kern County. Until December 2010, February 1978 was the highest precipitation month in recorded history in Bakersfield. The second anomaly was the storage in Lake Isabella. Unlike other wet years, such as 1983, the capacity of Lake Isabella during this wet year was never approached. It stayed approximately 80,000 acre feet below the storage level in 1983, indicating to me that the Army Corps of Engineers likely overshot their release estimates, meaning that there was more flood release in that year than there otherwise may have been. And I'm not sure why that is. The significance of both of them, you know, a heavy rainfall in February, right before the runoff period. Farmers are trying to plant their crops, and it's very, very challenging to do that when you can't get into the field because it's so wet. And then the runoff period begins, and the flood period begins, and you don't really have any place to put the water because everything's swamped. So for that reason, while 390,000 acre feet is not insignificant, it's probably less than what would have happened had that storm not occurred, and had the Army Corps done a little, I shouldn't say better job, but because it's hard to Monday morning quarterback something like this, but had utilized the storage to its maximum. Next slide, please. 1989 is a contrast. So 1989 had a relatively significant intertie flow year. We see the total appropriations at 345,000 acre feet during this wet year. What we can note about this is that between 1995 and 1998, every year including 1995, was over 145% year. 1995 being 193% year. And in my technical memorandum, I analyzed all 4 years independently, just to see how the system looked, how the results looked, and I present that data in that memorandum. But by 1998, everybody was wet. There just wasn't any place to put the water. You can see the storage in Isabella for Buena Vista was only 216 acre feet. This is historic. There was no other, since 1894, there was no other period worth 4 years at this high of runoff years consecutively. Next slide, please.
Dr. Howes, briefly on that, I believe you stated that slide concerned 1989. Was that accurate?
I'm sorry. My apologies. That was 1998.
Thank you.
So in conclusion, Buena Vista relies on a widely variable Kern River supply. In order to do that, it's important to have storage, and surface and groundwater storage are very important for the farmers to utilize that water. You can see the 3 years with maximum appropriations. I would like to correct make the final correction here. In 1969, the value 514,632 should be changed to 573,777. I'd like to note, or it's important to note also that crops and irrigation systems are changing within Buena Vista Water Storage District. Being able to invest and having invested into the system, a system that was originally designed and constructed well over 100 years ago, is important for the district to be able to meet the farmers' demands as they're changing crops and irrigation systems. Buena Vista has appropriated this water that's shown under or during high flow years to directly benefit or directly deliver water for farmer beneficial use, or to support that beneficial use by those farmers in that year or later. The exchanges that occur help to deal with these high flow waters. I didn't talk about the exchanges as much as I would like to here, but I did in my technical memorandum. I think it's important to understand that being able to exchange water with state water project contractors, benefiting both the contractor and Buena Vista, really operationally is important, as well as to have the flexibility to meet the needs today and into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howes. Just one quick question for you, if I may, just to clarify something. It's a small point, I think, but Ms. Mullen, actually, if we can go back to Dr. Howes' presentation, I think it'd be helpful if we can flip back to the slide before the last slide, or any of the slides with a map on it. Okay, here we go. Dr. Howes, I just wondered, and as I said, it may be a small point, but in the one of the blue boxes where you had identified losses in Isabella, are you with me so far?
I am.
Losses in Isabella, as I understand it, that includes evaporative loss and seepage losses. Is that right?
It would include, yes, it would include both evaporation and seepage losses in Lake Isabella. If I understand it correctly, it's computed as the remainder of, well, that's not true. I think they have a computation for it, but it would include, to my understanding, it would include both seepage and evaporation losses.
Okay, and then the number that is shown here, is that a number that has been adjusted in accordance with the percentage of volume that Buena Vista has stored in Isabella, or by some other metric?
That's correct. It depends on how much, yeah, it's the percentage of storage that Buena Vista has.
Thank you. That was all I had for right now. Thank you, Dr. Howes.
Absolutely.
Ms. Kinsey, in relation to the exhibits, if you like, we'll offer to prepare additional versions that show the corrections, if you'd like to have that for the record.
I think that would be helpful, because that way when we're going back, when yes, and my team is saying yes, please. That way when we go back and review, we won't forget. I mean, it will be there for us. That would be very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Becerra.
And what I would propose to do is have a new version of each of them with just a C after the number.
Good.
If that's
sounds
acceptable.
fine. That sounds fine. Thank you. With that, I think we should move forward. And I will turn to you when you're ready, Mr. O'Brien, for cross. But I did just want to say I wanted to acknowledge that it's 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and we're about to enter cross-examination of some very technical testimony. And I'm tired, and I'm sure Mr. Becerra and Mr. O'Brien, you both must be exhausted. So with that framework, please just, you've been professional all week. We're almost there, at least to the weekend. Please just continue in this vein, and let's finish strong with our, I know you need to represent your clients the best, to the best of your ability, and I encourage you to do so. But let's try to get to the bottom of this technical testimony and get to our weekend. So With that, I will look to you, Mr. O'Brien. Are you ready at this time to cross-examine Dr. House?
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey. I thought for a moment there you were going to recess us for the weekend.
Oh,
but-
wouldn't that be nice? Sorry. No, I'm not. I want to get done by Tuesday.
Well, the good news is I don't think I have a real lengthy cross for Dr. House, and I think my cross of Mr. Kike, if we get to him today, is much shorter. So I think there is some chance we could finish. So just FYI,
Okay.
we'll see.
Well, certainly if we get through to the end of Buena Vista's witnesses, then I'm done. That's all I have.
Good afternoon, Dr. House. I'm Kevin O'Brien, and I represent the Kern Water Bank Authority in this proceeding.
Hi, Mr. O'Brien.
We're going to be talking a lot about the Buena Vista Water Storage District, and I think, as you did with Mr. Becerra, I'm just going to refer to that district as Buena Vista. Is that okay?
Yes.
How would you describe your area of expertise within the engineering field?
I have expertise in a variety of areas within the engineering field, generally agricultural water related. I am considered an expert on evapotranspiration and crop water use demands. I train and conduct irrigation system design. I would say my majority of my work is with irrigation district modernization and strategizing how irrigation districts can maximize, or I shouldn't say maximize, but actually meet farmer demands and pressures from regulatory demands. I do that on a daily basis.
Do you consider yourself an expert in California water rights law?
I do not.
So is it fair to say that none of the statements contained in your written testimony are intended to provide an opinion regarding the scope of Buena Vista's Kern River water rights?
Not from a law perspective.
Your testimony really goes to physical facts, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. You're familiar with the current Buena Vista service area, correct?
Yes.
And is it your understanding, at least generally from this proceeding, that the land within that service area was previously owned by Miller and Lux?
Among others.
Okay. Have you ever prepared an analysis of the amount of Kern River water Miller and Lux was using within the current Buena Vista service area prior to December 19th, 1914?
No, I have not.
Do you have any plans to prepare such an analysis in the future?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Have you ever prepared an analysis of the amount of Kern River water Miller and Lux used within the current Buena Vista service area prior to the conveyance that occurred in 1927 through the quitclaim deed we've reviewed?
No, I have not.
And do you have any plans to prepare that type of analysis?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Let's turn now to your written testimony, Buena Vista 500. I'll ask Ms. Mullen to put that up on the screen, and we're going to go to paragraph 4, please. In that paragraph 4, I think you're describing generally your technical memorandum and some of the background work you did. And let's scroll over to the next page, Ms. Mullen. And then beginning with the word ultimately on line 1, you say, quote, ultimately, however, my analysis is technical and based on how Buena Vista obtained, routed, managed, used, stored, recharged, exchanged, and transferred water under the second point right in historical wet years, period, end quote. My question to you, sir, is, was your analysis of those different activities that are described in that sentence I just read limited to how Buena Vista itself undertook those activities?
Buena Vista being Buena Vista Water Storage District?
Correct.
I believe so. I'm sure there's ways to qualify that. But since Buena Vista is the second point water master, and Buena Vista is also controls their flow past second point and the flow past second point, it's my understanding that you are correct in your statement.
Okay, and my question wasn't very good. I'm not trying to ask you a trick question there. I guess maybe the better way to ask it is, based on your previous answers a minute ago, I take it that you didn't attempt to determine how any of Buena Vista's predecessors, including Miller and Lux, obtained, routed, managed, used, stored, recharged, exchanged, or transferred water under the second point right. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, referring to your testimony at paragraph 6, you could scroll down a bit. You described historical water diversion and water use data from selected historical wet years, which are described in that first sentence. My first question is, how do you define the term historical wet years?
The periods that I looked at, I believe I picked within there, and it looks like I'm missing a year in there. I think I had 1986 as well. The years initially were the wettest years, and then I felt like there were years that needed to be analyzed, such as 1986, because they were wet and the intertie ran for a brief period, so I wanted to include that. So I can't say that they were all equally wet, but they were all over 145%. I believe 145% of average on the Kern River. Again, I started with the wettest years, and then I found some that were close, and I thought, well, I should analyze those as well, just to see what it looked like, and I wanted to include all of that in my technical memorandum so that everybody could analyze those as well.
So it sounds like roughly 145% of average was the criterion you used to determine which wet years you're going to include.
Well, no, I don't. That's not. It sounded like that. That's what it ended up being. That wasn't a criteria that I used to analyze that data. I selected the wettest years and kind of flowed downward to include interesting years, I guess, or similar years for one reason or one way or another. But I definitely wanted to pick up the intertie years, the main intertie years. 82 and 84 were not included because they were really overflow years from 83. 83 was the main year that was analyzed there. But otherwise, I tried to be inclusive of years.
Now, the first year that was included in your analysis was 1938. Is that correct?
Yes.
Were there any earlier years on the Kern River that qualify generally for the criteria you applied, but you discarded them for one reason or another?
Well, the 1938 was selected because we were trying to overlap. I was trying to overlap the analysis timeframe of the 1964 ruling. I was not aware that the 1914 water rights were going to be challenged. So I don't, it was not something on my mind in terms of why selecting a year. It was, let's look at kind of what's been analyzed, make sure that that analysis was correct and be consistent with that analysis moving forward. So I didn't discard any. I didn't feel like going past or behind before 1938 was necessary.
But you'd agree that there were some wet years before 1938, correct?
Yes, there were some wet years.
You mentioned the 1964 ruling. Is that the State Water Rights Board decision 1196?
I don't know if that's but I likely is.
Okay. Let's turn now to your written testimony, Buena Vista 500, paragraph 5 again. The lines 11 through 14, you state that Buena Vista, let's see, I guess starting on page 12, you say, quote, Buena Vista has conjunctively used surface water and groundwater and its second point right in the Kern River and contract water from the State Water Project, the SWP, for many years, period, end quote. Have you specifically investigated the question of when Buena Vista started conjunctively using surface water and groundwater?
Not yet.
Not yet. Do you have any plans to do so?
I would like to, but I haven't been given permission to yet. So no.
Have you discussed that possibility with anyone?
No, I haven't.
And I take it from your previous answers that you have not determined when Buena Vista's predecessors, including Miller and Lux, started to conjunctively use surface water from the Kern River and groundwater. Is that correct?
That's correct.
How do you define the term conjunctively used as that term is used in your testimony?
So my definition of conjunctively used means that water is used, could be supplied by the surface or the ground. Typically, the supply source is consistent, meaning the surface water comes in, it recharges in the ground during certain years, typically dry years. That water is pumped or could be used by the roots of the crop through subsurface irrigation or high water table. If that water originated in the surface as surface water, it would be considered conjunctively used, in my expert opinion.
Let's turn now to paragraph 7 of your testimony. And that states, and I'll read the first sentence that starts on the bottom of page 2 of the document and goes to the following page. Quote, to briefly summarize my conclusions in Exhibit Buena Vista 503, my analysis demonstrates that the maximum volume of the second point right and Buena Vista's appropriation of water under that right materially exceeds 500,000 acre feet in wet years, period, end quote. You said a few minutes ago that you're not an expert in California water law and that you weren't intending to provide any opinions in your testimony regarding the scope of Buena Vista's water right on the Kern River. And can I, based on that previous testimony, interpret this sentence that I just read as simply indicating what physically happened on the Kern River based on your investigation?
Yes.
So when you use the term appropriation of water in your testimony, you're really, what are you talking about? You're talking mostly about diversion or control?
Can you be more specific? I think, well,
I guess it's just a definitional question for me. When you say there at the top of that page, appropriation of water under that right, is that a synonym for use of water under that right?
I'm not going to use the term use in this context, as it has different meanings to different people at different times. I would say that the appropriations, as I use them, indicate absorption of that water, meaning that they became within the control of Buena Vista and were utilized, or they were controlled and remain under control of Buena Vista. Whether that was directly utilized or delivered to the farmers and used beneficially that year, or whether it was stored to be used in a following year, or whether it was stored and evaporated from a regulating reservoir, those would all fall into the absorption. And then it could also include, and does include, as it's laid out in my technical memorandum, exchanges and banking, as well as storage in Lake Isabella and losses in Lake Isabella.
So when you use the term appropriation in your testimony, you're basically, the definition of that goes to this concept of absorption that you just described.
I'm going to object Ms. State's testimony. Well, I can explain.
Yeah, what part of this? Yeah, I mean, you understand where Mr. O'Brien is going. So what is your concern, Mr. Becerra?
Dr. House's testimony contains a definition of appropriation he used.
Oh, good. Well, then let's look at that. Where is it?
Paragraph 5.
Well,
I'm
going to object once again. If Mr. Becerra wants to make an objection, he's certainly entitled to do that, but I don't think he's entitled to point me in a new direction in my cross-examination. The term appropriation was used. I asked him about his definition, and Dr. House indicated that his definition is based on this concept of absorption, and I'm simply trying to understand that concept better. And I frankly don't want to go look at a different portion of the testimony. I want to stay on the portion that I'm on right now.
I understand that, Mr. O'Brien, but I want to look, and so I realize Mr. Becerra interjected this, and that's what it is. But since we're getting to the bottom of the matter, I think this is exactly what I was referring to. Where are Ms. Mullins? Can we scroll to paragraph 5? You're going to humor me, Mr. O'Brien, I suppose, whether you like it or not. Okay, let's stop right there. I was looking through, I don't have the testimony in front of me. I have the technical report, so this is helpful. Okay. Now with that in my mind, we can scroll back. Let's scroll back down, Ms. Mullen, to where we were before. And now that we've had a complete interlude and we're now on, I've forgotten the question. I will turn to you, Mr. O'Brien. I haven't ruled on the objection or not because let's just try the question again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey. I'm just trying to have a better understanding, Dr. Howes, of the relationship between the word appropriation as you've used that in your written testimony, and this concept of absorption, which you described for me a couple of minutes ago. Maybe we'll just start with that. Can you just explain the relationship between those two concepts? Are they the same? Are they different? If they're different, how are they different?
In my technical memorandum, I give equations on how to compute both how I computed the appropriations and the absorption. They are laid out very, very clearly there. So I recommend anyone that wants to look at that, look at those equations. I will be happy to explain that at this point for you, Mr. O'Brien. The appropriations are the summation of the absorption, both upstream and downstream of second point, as I laid out in those equations. The absorption upstream of second point, and as I said previously, includes exchanges and transfers upstream of second point. It also includes Lake Isabella storage and Lake Isabella losses. There would also be absorption downstream of second point. The equation used to compute the absorption is I would say, more technical. And I think what you're looking for is what goes into the in-between. What's happening in the zone of influence? Is that what you're asking, Mr. O'Brien?
That's exactly what I'm asking. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Within the zone of influence, which includes Buena Vista Lake Reservoir, it includes the river channel and recharge facilities along that Buena Vista controls. Also the outlet canal, and would include the inlet canal in the years that was operational. Includes the flood channel canal up to 46, the Buttonwillow service area, and Maple service area. So as water comes past second point, as it moves into those facilities, it will be used to recharge groundwater for later beneficial use by the farmers of Buena Vista. It could be used to store water in Buena Vista Lake Reservoir for use during that year or the subsequent year, as was done in many years. It could also be used to directly deliver water to those farmers within Buena Vista's Buttonwillow and Maple service area, and also recharge within those service areas for use that year and in later years, say during a drought year. I hope I've been inclusive with that, but I may have missed some other aspects.
That was very helpful, Dr. Howes. I really appreciate it. I guess one final question on this line. This concept of absorption that you've now very thoroughly described, is that a concept that you regularly use in your engineering analyses? Is that sort of a common term of art for you, or is it unique to this situation?
I would say it's unique in reviewing the 1964 analysis or the analysis used in the 1964 Water Board hearing. Hoping that's the right term. That term was used, and I agreed with it. It was a term that seemed to be consistent, both to be consistent with that analysis and also to because there is, the terminology in water engineering can be confusing. It was an inclusive term that was used, again, from that analysis. I can't take credit for creating it, but I wanted to be consistent, and it seemed to be a very inclusive term that would fit with what is going on both upstream and downstream for this analysis.
And who made you aware of the 1964 ruling?
I am not sure. I may have found that myself. It may have been someone at Buena Vista. I don't recall. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'd like to turn now to paragraph 9 of your written testimony. Toward the bottom of the page. Maybe it's, let me see here. Maybe scroll over to the next page, Ms. Moen. Thank you. Yes, at the top of this next page, right at the very end of paragraph 9 of your written testimony, you refer to Buena Vista's storage assets. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell me what is included within the term Buena Vista's storage assets in your mind?
Well, obviously it changes year to year, but I'm going to just be inclusive to incorporate everything. It would be cells 1, 2, and 3 in Buena Vista Lake Reservoir, Lake Isabella, groundwater in their banking facilities, which have changed over time, groundwater in both external and internal banking facilities. And that should cover it.
Would it also include groundwater stored underneath private lands located within Buena Vista?
Oh, absolutely.
Now you say in that sentence we were looking at that the storage assets were more empty going into 2017 than going into 1952 or 1969. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
What did you do to determine that the storage assets were more empty going into 2017?
The Lake Isabella was not available in 1952, but compared to 1969, I believe Lake Isabella was at a lower level coming in from 2016. I also did not do a detailed analysis, but understand that the groundwater elevations throughout the area of Buena Vista Water Storage District and the surrounding areas was much lower in 2017 than 1969. Buena Vista Lake Reservoir was different in 1952 than either 1969 or 2017. In that case, obviously 1952 Lake Isabella was not available. Buena Vista Lake was started the year at 0 acre feet and ended the year at 127,000 acre feet, or approximately 127,000 acre feet. So that was dry, but again, the groundwater and the Lake Isabella was not available. So the groundwater levels were higher in 1952 Again, this was not a technical analysis. It was more of an observation, a brief observation.
You said you did not do a detailed analysis comparing groundwater levels going into 2017 in comparison to groundwater levels going into 1952 or 1969. What exactly did you do to reach the conclusion that the groundwater basin or aquifers were more empty going into 2017?
It was, I don't recall exactly. I believe that I looked at some groundwater contour elevations in different years, but I can't be specific about that.
Thank you. That concludes my cross-examination.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. I have one question that now I'm confused about, Dr. House, so maybe you can help me, because we turned to, hopefully you pointed me to your equations in your technical memorandum. So maybe I can ask Ms. Mullen, or maybe ask one of you. I have the technical memorandum in front of me, but I don't know the exhibit number. Can we?
503.
503 KW, I'm sorry, Buena Vista 503, please, Ms. Mullen. And I'm looking at document page 18. Hopefully it's somewhere around PDF page 18.
They're the same.
Good. And hopefully this is not something I missed in your testimony, Dr. House, but so I'm looking at this equation for total appropriations under second point right. And I see that you have subtracted Isabella losses in this equation. Is that
During my, sorry.
No, go ahead.
During my corrections,
Yes.
I noted that equation 3, that subtraction, that minus sign should be a plus sign.
Thank you. I thought maybe I had missed it, which is why I asked. That's all I have, just to clarify that I was following along. I'm going to ask just, we can take a break, but Mr. Becerra, do you anticipate you're going to have redirect based on that? Well, I should pause. Does anyone else have questions for Dr. House today on cross? And Mr. Becerra, are you going to have redirect?
Very briefly, if we could have a 5-minute break just for me to think about it
Yes.
very briefly.
Well, I think it's time for us to take a break anyway. So let's come back at 3:40.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey.
All right, let's go back on the record. Mr. Becerra, I believe you were going to decide and collect your thoughts for redirect. Do you have redirect for Mr. House?
No, we do not.
Okay. And I see your next witness, and help me with the pronunciation. Is it Mr. Kika? Is that correct? Mr. Becerra, will you help me with the
Yes. Sorry, I thought I was unmuted. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Was that a correct pronunciation? Am I close?
You are correct. It's Kika.
Kika, wonderful. Mr. Becerra, are you prepared to present Mr. Kika? Shall I swear him in?
Yes, please.
Mr. Kika, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us so much, almost 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, which is really quite a time. So thank you for being with us. Will you please raise your right hand? Mr. Kika, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. You may proceed, Mr. Becerra.
Good morning, good afternoon, Mr. Kika.
It's been a long day.
It's been a long day. Can you please state your name for the record?
Terry Kika.
Is Exhibit Buena Vista 100 your written testimony?
Yes, it is.
Is Exhibit Buena Vista 101 a summary of your written testimony?
Yes.
Are Exhibits Buena Vista 102 through 109 the exhibits to your written testimony?
Yes, they are.
And Mr. Kika, what is your occupation?
I'm a farmer. I farm in the Buena Vista Water Storage District, and I also farm in the Semi-Tropic Water Storage District.
And Ms. Mullen, could you please bring up Exhibit Buena Vista 101? And Mr. Kika, using Exhibit Buena Vista 101, can you please provide a summary of your testimony?
Yes. During my testimony, I will be referring to the Buena Vista Water Storage District as Buena Vista, and also the Semi-Tropic Water Storage District as Semi-Tropic. Next slide, please. This slide here identifies the 2 water districts that I farm in the Kern subbasin. Buena Vista is in the salmon color, and the Semi-Tropic district is in the, I call it the light green or olive green color. I farm particularly in the Buttonwillow service area, and the Maple service area, as you can see, is located to the east of the Henry Miller Water District. Next slide, please. This slide here is an interesting one. About 29 years ago, I was told that Buena Vista was too fat. And well, I'm here to tell you a little different. Buena Vista is not too fat, referring to the water supply and its diversions and whatnot. The reason being is that during the dry periods, Buena Vista can't deliver all of the surface water needs to its farmers. So therefore, the farmers have to resort to groundwater pumping. And because of the second point right, and the use of it, like they've done historically, it's allowed us to continue farming within our boundaries. It just keeps us sustainable. Next slide, please. This slide here, just a little history on our family. We're immigrants from Italy, but anyhow, family's been here farming in Buena Vista for 116 years. I've personally been farming for 48 years. Been a director of the Buena Vista Water Storage District for the last 37 years. Next slide, please. This slide identifies my farmland and conservation easements that I have in Semi-Tropic and in Buena Vista. The lower portion of this map, you see my pistachio acreage located in the Buttonwillow service area. And as you proceed northward in the Buttonwillow service area, you'll see at the upper northern border of Buena Vista, my conservation easement lands within Buena Vista. and that is State Highway 46, otherwise known as Wasco Road. And if you proceed further north, those are my other conservation lands in the Symmetropic Water Storage District, which is almost butted up to the Kern Wildlife Refuge. As you look now to the far right of the map, you'll see a red block, and that indicates my almond acreage that I farm in Symmetropic. Next slide, please. Now, this is a slide you've seen many times this past week, but it's important to me. And the reason why I wanted to show this slide is because, as it indicates, the variability of the Kern rivers is very challenging. And recharge is vital to sustainability of us farmers in Buena Vista. As you can look at that chart, you can see the extreme large years, and then you can also see you could call them severely dry years. And what's interesting about this is because of Buena Vista's use of the second point right, it's allowed us farmers in Buena Vista to have sustainable ground pumping water. For instance, I've not had to lower my pump bowls in the last 48 years that I've farmed in Buena Vista. And that's because of how Buena Vista imports their recharge water into the district to keep us sustainable when surface waters aren't available. Next slide, please. This slide identifies the Buena Vista Water Storage District, but mainly I'm looking at the Buttonwillow Service Area. And as you look, there's a bold line to the east of the district. That's Interstate 5. And about midsection, you can see paralleling Interstate 5 is the Buttonwillow Ridge and the Symmetropic Ridge. What's unique about this is that those ridges help hold water at a higher elevation in the Buttonwillow Service Area. For instance, the depth to water where I farm in the Buttonwillow Service Area is about 100 feet. In the Symmetropic Water Storage District, it's 400 feet to standing water level. So you can see the significance of having those ridges in place that helps hold the elevation of water at a much higher level because of the natural structure, but more importantly, the second point right, bringing that water in and recharging those canals is very vital. Next slide, please. Okay, now this slide here identifies my farmland in the Buttonwillow Service Area. As indicated on the legend, the blue line to the west of my property is the West Side Canal. Then you notice that purple line, that's the corn camp ditch. And the little yellow line is the mole ditch. These are canals and ditches that deliver water to my property during the growing periods, but they also are my recharge areas. It's a term was conjured up yesterday from Mr. Ashlock calling it clay soils. Well, anyhow, yes, the land is very clayey at where we farm in the Buttonwillow Service Area. But what's unique is the fact that where the canals are located, because they're excavated, and water is probably, I don't know, I would say probably a foot above ground level when it's being gravity flowed. More importantly, those areas have all been dug down deep enough where sand is exposed. And therefore, that's why you get the recharge. You get great recharge with the canals. Once canals are full and we shut the system off, in less than a week, the water's gone. And we're talking canals that will flow 450 to 500 CFS. So the water's going somewhere. But anyhow, it's just great recharge. And also within my property, I have a multitude of irrigation wells on site. And so that I have a direct correlation with elevation of the water coming up once recharge in the canals is being performed by the water district. There's a direct correlation. My water levels respond accordingly. So the longer the water stays in the canals, the more recharge I get. It's like filling up a dry sponge. Next slide, please. All right, this slide identifies my costs. These are my numbers. We have meters on all our irrigation wells, and utilizing my energy costs and what my invoices, I was able to figure out what my cost on a per acre foot basis is. And as you can see in Buena Vista, it's $45 to pump an acre foot of water, roughly. And Semi-Tropic, my costs are $160, and that's just simply because of the depth of water. The next line identifies the required water demand to grow crops either in Buena Vista or Semi-Tropic. And I as indicated in my written testimony, I manage other properties where they have pistachios. I only have almonds in Semi-Tropic, but as I indicated in the Buena Vista, I farm pistachios, and I use roughly less than an acre foot less in Buena Vista than I do in Semi-Tropic. And the reason for that is because in Buena Vista, we have what we call like a black clay adobe type soil, which has great water retention. In Semi-Tropic, it's a sandy soil type, and it doesn't have the retention that compared to the black clay adobe in Buena Vista. And just looking at that bottom line, it's roughly 4 times the cost to grow a crop in Semi-Tropic than it is in Buena Vista as far as water costs. It's very significant. And sometimes, you know, in farming, you never know between the markets and whatnot and yields. Sometimes the only money you make is the cost savings in water. But anyhow, all right, next slide, please. In conclusion, I just have to say this. The second point right allows us to take water during the wet periods to protect the survival of the endangered family farmer. And that concludes my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kika. And if you've been watching the hearing so far, you'll know I've been exercising my discretion to ask a few questions of the witness right after the testimony while it's fresh in my mind. So if I may, there are a couple of questions that came to mind, and it's my opportunity to, I think, get a little bit of background, just general background about farming in the Buena Vista district. So I wanted to understand, in your experience farming, my understanding is that the crop pattern, as you described, has changed over the years that you've been farming within the Buena Vista Service District. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then now we are moving much more towards the orchard crops.
That is correct.
Yes.
That is correct.
And then currently for these orchard demands, in one particular year, and I realize this may change, I assume, you can tell me, that depending on it's a dry year or a wet year, how you might irrigate. But in general, what is the trend of your demand from January all through the year until December? For example, when is your peak demand? When is the lowest demand? Can you just generally describe for me?
Sure, I could start off the year. The low demand can be as early as January. Again, it all depends on precipitation, you know, because the soil does hold water. The biggest demand starts in June, July, you're peaking, and August are your biggest demands. And then you'll finish off again as a follow-up irrigation towards early fall.
And then with these orchard crops, you have pistachios, as I understand, within Buena Vista. Is your demand relatively similar from year to year? There's some variation with precipitation, but is it a significant variation with precipitation?
No, it's not a significant variation.
And then let's say in a wet year, when there's a good surface water supply, would you in a wet year normally use any groundwater?
If,
Normally
Ye-
may be an unfair word, but would, it's an open-ended question.
yeah, it is. It's great when we can just rely totally on surface water. That would be wonderful if we could, yes.
Does that, it just depends on the particular year whether or not that's a possibility?
It does. It depends on a couple of things. It depends on how Buena Vista, what their storage is in water storage. It also depends on even sometimes previous years. You know, if you have a consecutive wet years, you get a lot of saturation. But your demand doesn't change much at all. It's still going to be for us roughly 3.5 acre feet.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Kika. That helps me with some orientation here before I turn things over. Mr. O'Brien, do you have questions for Mr. Kika today? Do you see you're on mute?
Yes,
Okay.
I do have a few questions for Mr. Kika. Thank you.
Okay, I will turn things over to you, Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, Ms. Kinsey. Good afternoon, Mr. Kika. I'm Kevin O'Brien. I represent the Kern Water Bank Authority, and I think you and I have met before. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Yes, we have met.
So I'd like to start with the subject of water transfers. Mr. Ashlock, did you happen to watch Mr. Ashlock's testimony yesterday?
I did.
And he testified, as you know, about a number of water transfers that Buena Vista has participated in over the past 20 years. Did you hear that testimony?
I do recall parts of it.
And many of those transfers have involved transfers of Kern River water by Buena Vista. Is that correct?
Kern River water, other types of water.
Okay, but Kern River water has been included, correct?
It has been a part of it. Not all of it, but a part of it.
Okay. At one point, Mr. Ashlock told me that since 2014, Buena Vista has transferred a combination of Kern River water and State Water Project water totaling 315,000 acre feet to buyers primarily located in Kern County, with Castaic being something of an exception. Do you recall that?
I do.
Does that sound right to you?
I can't verify the amount of water, but I do recall us selling water locally.
Okay.
Yes, in the Castaic.
Fair enough. And Mr. Ashlock also testified that the total revenues raised by Buena Vista for water sold since 2014 was $125 million. Do you recall that?
I recall reading that, yes.
And does that sound like, at least in the ballpark of a correct figure to you?
You're asking a farmer if it's in the ballpark. Yeah, it's fairly close, probably, more or less.
Okay. And Mr. Ashlock also told me that the revenues from these water transfers were used to pay for capital expenditures without the need for financing, such as the issuance of bonds. Is that a correct statement?
That's correct.
And that the use of those revenues without having to issue bonds, that would allow Buena Vista, as a general proposition, to keep the water rates of its farmers relatively low. Is that correct?
It's reasonably low.
How do the water rates for Buena Vista compare to other districts in Kern County?
Objection, relevance.
I think, well, Mr. Becerra, you can respond to this, but I understood in Mr. Kika's presentation, he compared the cost to grow in both districts. So I think it's been raised, but you may respond.
I
Go ahead, Mr.
can
Becerra.
respond. I believe that was his groundwater pumping costs.
Oh, as opposed to surface water. Mr. O'Brien, you have something to say, I can see.
Well, I think we've opened up the scope of these issues pretty broadly. And I think given the extensive testimony by Mr. Ashlock yesterday about these revenues and how they've been used, I think I should be allowed to at least ask a couple questions about the effects on the water rates for the farmers within Buena Vista.
Let's make it very quick, okay?
Okay. So Mr. Kika, let me restate my question. How do the water rates paid by farmers within Buena Vista compare as a general proposition with the water rates of other agricultural water districts in Kern County?
Well, I don't know what the water rights in Semi-Tropic, other than they have a state water contract with the Kern County Water Agency. Likewise, so does does Buena Vista. I'm not sure I understand how you mean compare. Are you talking about cost-wise?
Yeah, and my question may have been unclear. Let me try it again. So I'm just talking about water rates, the water rates that are paid by farmers for the irrigation water they receive. And you told me a minute ago that I can't remember exact words you used, but you said the water rates in Buena Vista were pretty good. I'd just like to ask you one or two questions about how the Buena Vista water rates compare to the water rates of other ag districts in Kern County, if you know.
I don't know. I can only compare it to Semi-Tropic, and as other districts in Kern County, when your deliveries of state water is very minimal, your cost per acre foot go extremely expensive. Other than that, and they just pass on their cost, their state cost onto us farmers. So it's for everybody in Kern County. It should be fairly the same as far as state water.
As far as state water, but
State water. I don't know about the river waters. I only know Buena Vista and what we do.
okay. And you said a few minutes ago that the cost to pump groundwater in Buena Vista is around $45 per acre foot. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the reason it's at that level is that groundwater levels are relatively high in Buena Vista.
That's correct.
Okay, so that's an economic benefit to the farmers in Buena
It
Vista.
is, and it's been that way ever since I've been farming. My grandfather, my father, it's a norm.
Now, Mr. Ashlock also talked about this water transfer that Buena Vista has entered into with the Castaic Lake Water Agency. Did you hear that testimony?
Yes,
And Buena Vista has received revenues from that transfer, I think, starting in around 2006, 2007 timeframe. Is that correct?
that's correct.
And that transfer goes to 2036.
Yes, that's correct.
And that water involves, or the water that's transferred includes Kern River water, correct?
It includes, it's just Buena Vista's water that we bank in Rosedale.
But the water banked in Rosedale for Castaic,
It can be, excuse me, it can be any types of water that goes.
but it does include Kern River water, correct?
It can, yes.
Okay. And that water, once it goes to Castaic, is used outside Kern County, correct?
That's correct.
When that transfer was approved, were you on the board?
Yes, I was.
Was there any discussion about the appropriateness of transferring water for use outside Kern River water for use outside Kern County?
Objection, vague and ambiguous.
Mr. O'Brien, it's the same question. So let's
Okay.
avoid the word appropriate.
Okay, I should just excise that from my vocabulary. can you just recall for me, Mr. Kika, if you would, the discussion that occurred at the Buena Vista Board when the Castaic water transfer was approved on the issue of transferring Kern River water outside for use outside of Kern County?
Objection, vague and ambiguous.
Was there a question there, Mr. O'Brien? I thought, did you start with recall? Can you recall for me?
And you count for me, I think.
Okay.
I thought I said recount.
Oh, recount. Maybe I misheard.
Let me try it one more time, Mr. We're all getting tired. Can you recount for me, to the best you remember, the discussion that occurred at the Buena Vista Board of Directors when the Castaic water transfer agreement was approved regarding the transfer of Kern River water for use outside Kern County?
Objection, vague and ambiguous.
Overruled. You may answer, Mr. Kika.
I vaguely remember the conversation. I just know that it's high flow water. However we categorized high flow water, it could be a multitude of different types of water. We never made it specific. It's what was available to Buena Vista.
So you don't recall any specific discussion about the pros and cons of transferring Kern River water for use outside of Kern County?
The only thing that I do remember is that these would have been waters that have historically had flowed north of Wasco Road, which would have been the lower river water.
And how did the discussion of that the water would have flowed north of Wasco Road enter into the discussion of selling water for use in Castaic?
Objection, relevance, vague and ambiguous, undue consumption of time. I can explain if you like, Ms. Kinsey.
Sure, explain, because I'm going to, my inclination is to overrule it, but I'll give you a chance to explain it.
The questions are asking Mr. Kika to recall a generalized discussion at the Board of Directors from 16 years ago. I mean, I don't know where we're going.
Well, that's not a relevance objection. That's if he doesn't remember, he can say that.
That's accurate, Mr. O'Brien, although next time I can say the same. So I'm going to overrule the objection and allow Mr. Kika to respond if he can.
Honestly, if you want me to recall the exact conversation, I can't. That's fair. I can't recall it. I just know that we was discussed generally, and that's all I can say.
And I'm not asking for an exact conversation. I'm asking for the gist of the conversation that occurred around the fact that this water would have otherwise flowed to the areas north of Wasco Road.
There was no emphasis put on the whereabouts of this water going north. It was just the fact that waters historically flowed north. Historically into Tulare Lake. I mean, that's it.
I have no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Kika.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Does anyone else have questions for Mr. Kika? Then, Mr. Becerra, I will turn to you. Do you have redirect for Mr. Kika, or do you need a few minutes to decide?
We have no redirect for Mr. Kika.
Thank you. Then with that, Mr. Kika, I want to thank you so much for joining us late on a Friday and being a part of this hearing. Your testimony is important, and thank you for taking the time to be here. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think it's now 4:11. I'm not inclined to go any further today. I don't think anyone else is either. I'm not even inclined to consider moving Buena Vista's exhibits into evidence because I don't know that we can, that requires some level of precision, and I'm not sure we're all up for it at this moment. It will also, if there are any issues to work out, it'll give everyone a moment to get that ready for Monday morning. Before we turn, I will ask whether there are procedural matters we should raise before we break. I also wanted to note that on Monday, my intent is to take a slightly longer lunch break from about 11:30 or slightly before until 1 o'clock. So all of you can plan accordingly for about an hour and a half lunch break around that time. Is there anything else we should talk about or any procedural or housekeeping matters we should discuss before we break for the weekend and rest our minds?
I appreciate the early break, Ms. Kinsey. Thank you.
We all do. Thank you so much once again. We got through a lot. We're really making progress. And thank you to all the witnesses who have testified so far. I really appreciate it and spending the time with us. Thanks to all of you. Have a great weekend. I will see you Monday morning.
Happy Mother's Day.
Thank
you.
Happy
Thank you.
Mother's Day, yes.